is Mark Wunstler. I'm the Coordinator of Exhibitions and Collections for Lehigh University Art Galleries, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this, our second of the LUAG AAD annual lecture series. That's the Art, Architecture, Design, Lehigh University Art Galleries lecture series, which is sponsored by the Visiting Lecturers Committee and Arts Lehigh. A few things I want to bring to your attention in the upcoming weeks. In 3 weeks, we will be back here for the third in the lecture series, which is a panel discussion, New Voices from the AAD, which will coincide with our 2010 faculty exhibition, which is in full speed upstairs. If you peek behind the curtain, you'll see exciting things happening. That show will open next Wednesday, the 31st at 11 a.m. Other things I'd like to bring to your attention, just right now across the way at the gallery at Rausch Business Center, there's a fantastic exhibition of photographs from LUAG's teaching collection, featuring photos by Margaret Brooke White and Louis Baltz, which is a real gem of a show, and I hope you have a chance to see it. Also, open until tomorrow is the 5th annual jury student show over in Girdler Gallery. So if you find yourself in the University Center, please check it out. I think that is most of it by way of business. The one thing about the structure of tonight's talk, Michael's going to be speaking in a sort of two-part talk, and in between there will be a brief intermission, 5 minutes or less, intermission for refreshments, which are located in the back of the gallery. So if you would hang tight, we're going to kind of reset some things and then get back to it. So don't wander too far because it's 2 parts. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Michael Brenson. I've known Michael for something over 10 years now as part of the sculpture faculty at the Milton Avery Graduate School of the Arts at Bard College, where we both teach for 8 weeks in the summer, various parts of that. Teaching students in photography, painting, writing, film, video, sculpture, and music sound. I think I missed anybody. Michael, in addition to being a faculty member in Bard's MFA program, was art critic at the New York Times from 1982 to 1991, and has been writing about art and artists for more than 3 decades. He received his BA from Rutgers University, an MA in creative writing, and PhD in art history from Johns Hopkins University. He's been a Getty Scholar and a Guggenheim Fellow. He's curated exhibitions of Magdalena Vaginovich at PS1 in 1993, Ryoji Koye at the gallery at Takashimaya in 1994, and Jonathan Silver at the Sculpture Center in 1995. Brenson's publications include Visionaries and Outcasts, the NEA Congress, and the Place of the Visual Arts in America, 2001, Solid Wit, Concrete Block Structures, 2002, and Acts of Engagement, Writings on Art, Criticism, and Institutions, 1993 to 2002, published in 2004. He's the author of museum catalog essays on Elizabeth Catlett, Mel Edwards, Alberto Giacometti, Maya Lin, Juan Munoz, Martin Currier, and David Smith, as well as numerous other essays on modern and contemporary sculpture, public art, contemporary art, and its institutions. He's currently working on a biography of David Smith. Please welcome Michael Brenson.
Well, thank you, Mark. Thank you for coming. I have to give you some idea, a little bit of an introduction as to what I'm going to do here and what you're going to hear. It's basically 2 talks that I have come back and worked on, 2 talks that I gave that they were important to me last year. One was for the Albright Knox Art Gallery in Buffalo for an exhibition, around an exhibition called Action Abstraction, Pollock de Kooning in American Art, 1940 to 1976. And what was interesting or unusual about the show, it was really a show about the impact of two critics, Clement Greenberg and Harold Rosenberg. And one of the first exhibitions, maybe the first exhibition I'd seen, which really tried to chart and take seriously the effect that critics have on an artistic landscape. I think everybody assumes that critics have a certain impact, but nobody quite knows what that means. And anyway, the show tried to deal with that, and there was a panel around it. And so the first talk that I'm going to give, which is called The Mud Lion, was really for that talk and for that panel. And we were asked to deal with questions of revisionist history, critic-artist relationship, and blind spots, and I thought I would do it through a particular biographical event in David Smith's life, which I thought could get me into all these other issues. The other talk, which is called The Potential of Art, it was for the panel at the Phillips Collection in October that was called Collaborative Creativity, Collective Responsibility, the Potential of Art, and I chose to go for the latter part of that. And the reason I've come back to it is those talks were important to me, and I wanted a chance to revisit them and actually rework them. Because in the context of those situations, we really didn't have a chance to talk about it. At the Albright Knox, there were four of us up there. When we were all done, it turned into a discussion, a general discussion of art criticism, and that was it. And the individual papers weren't addressed. And then the potential of art thing at the Phillips was even worse, because there were 6 speakers, and it went on for 3 hours. And by the time the 6th was done, I don't know what it turned into, but it was a kind of general discussion of arts policy and the relationship of art and government, etc. So these talks have been lingering for me, and I wanted to be able to come back to them, and it seemed like this would be a good moment, because for me there's a lot of stuff to talk about, and I hope that they will engender responses in you. The biography, Mark mentioned that I'm writing a biography of David Smith, and I mean, it's a curious kind of business. It's quite a solitary thing, and I would have thought when I began it that a lot of people would have been interested in the notion of biography and David Smith, but in fact that's not the case. So I wanted to try to make, it was important for me to try to make some of these issues that I'm struggling with, which I think are interesting, public, and put them out there in such a way that people would talk to them. So that's a little bit the background of it. Just to give you an idea, the first part of it is about 25 minutes, somewhere in the order of 25-30 minutes. The second part is about 20 minutes, and then we're going to be showing you a film which is 9 minutes. The whole thing is structured around an hour, and there'll be a break in between, and we just encourage you maybe to sip rather than like take a whole glass, so we can get you back sooner rather than later. Okay, I just wanted to show you a couple of images about David Smith, because I don't take for granted that all of you know him. If I were giving this talk 25 or 30 years ago, I think I could have taken for granted that you knew who he was, because at the time he was considered America's greatest sculptor, and there were people who actually thought he was America's greatest artist. And but things switch historically. It's a subject in itself, and I find I teach people here now who have never heard of him. So I try to take this a little for granted as I can, and but I do feel there is such a thing as American sculpture before David Smith and American sculpture after David Smith, and they're not the same thing. So he was born in 1906, he died in 1965. I'm just going to run through a couple of images quickly. This is, the sculpture is called Interior for Exterior. It's from the 1930s. It gives you a little bit of an idea of the kind of language that he's working with, which is somewhat surrealist in its structure. There's very much a hint of some kind of domestic intrigue or domestic conflict going on, hints of things inside the house, but with Smith, the house is never actually enclosed. You always see a frame, but you always see through it. And there's also a point about the way in which it's made, because it's quite small. It's about this height, and you can kind of imagine him making it like having it on a table and working it really up close, so that the shaping of the steel and the actual welding has a sort of intimate making process to it that was very much part of its time. Mark? Yeah. This is one of his most famous works. It's called Australia. It's in the Museum of Modern Art. It's 1951, and it is obviously an entirely different gestural language. The sculpture exists in space. What he actually does to those steel lines, if you think about it, it's a phenomenal kind of feat, the kind of, bending steel as if you were painting a line on the canvas. It's about 9 or 10 feet tall. And what I'd also point out about it, the imagery of it, you've got a hint of an insect on the left, and you've got a hint almost of a kind of chrysalis or cocoon on the top, and then a kind of kangaroo form. And so he's someone who was always interested in animals, and I tend to see this too almost as a garment. And if you do see it as a garment, something to be wrapped around or imaginatively wrapped around, it has a slightly shamanic quality or shamanistic quality, because there are these various animals, and there's a hint that then in the experience of the work, there's a possibility of a certain kind of transformation. And at the very least, there's a performative energy to it and a kind of function that the work has. And you can see where the term drawing in space comes from, and it's very different from that 30s way of working. This is one of a series of works that was called, he did bunches of series, and this was the Tank Totem series, and all of them include the element that you see at the top, which is an oil barrel top that's cut up and used. And what I point out here, apart from the use of color and kind of extraordinarily delicacy and simplicity of it, the way in which those steel lines are actually set against the white steel plank, a kind of delicacy, but slightly, almost creepy to me in its relationship, the relationship to the body, but yet the kind of stateliness of the thing itself and the kind of lyrical beauty with which it actually stands in space. And finally, he's best known for his cube eyes, which are works he did between 1962 and 1965 when he died. He did, I think, 30 of them, and he was still working on them. And this is stainless steel. I'm not sure, it's like probably 15 or 20 feet tall. It's a photograph he took himself. You can always tell a Smith photograph. And they were somewhat different in that he ordered the cubes of steel. And he had his assistant, Leon Pratt, do the welding. And for someone who was sort of insistently involved in every aspect of this process, it was a different departure and a different way of working. He burnished the surfaces of them so that they have an extraordinary receptivity to light. They become, when light hits them in a certain way, even though it's steel, it becomes dematerialized. So there's a kind of almost a dematerialization of art which takes place here, which becomes much more emphatic in art history in the subsequent generation. But it also gives you an idea of the ambition and the stateliness and the imagination, and also the slight quirkiness here too, because there's a little circle down there on the left, and somehow this whole big structure is supported by something, a ring that's almost inconsequential. Okay. So this is called the Mud Lion. I'm going to move what may seem far afield from Clement Greenberg, Harold Rosenberg, and Action Abstraction, Pollock de Kooning in American Art, 1940 to 1976, and reflect on an event in the childhood of the most important sculptor in the exhibition, David Smith. The significance of the event was recognized by the art historian and art critic Rosalind Krauss in a footnote in her 1971 Smith monograph, Terminal Ironworks. The art historian and archivist Garnett McCoy mentioned it on the first page of his introduction to a 1973 anthology of Smith writings. While the Smith literature has announced the event, however, its energies have remained largely dormant. It's been more call than response, more promise than consideration. Since I became aware of it more than a decade ago, it's been waiting for me. If I were not writing a biography of Smith, I don't think the event would have demanded attention. I'm sure I wouldn't have jumped at the opportunity to dwell on it in public, and by so doing, commit myself to activating its energies in the present. So here's the evidence of the event that I can now provide. We know about it primarily through Dorothy Daner, who was married to Smith from 1927 to 1952. During their marriage, she was primarily a painter. After leaving him in 1950, she became a sculptor. After Smith's death at 59 in 1965, and until her death at 93 in 1994, she did dozens of interviews. In several of them, she spoke expansively about their life together, first in Manhattan and Brooklyn, then at Bolton Landing, 220 miles north of Manhattan, in the Adirondacks, where they settled in 1940. Her memory wasn't perfect, no one's is, but I found it to be remarkably reliable. Without the information she passed on about his childhood in Decatur, Indiana, and Paulding, Ohio, knowledge of his early years would be negligible. In an interview for the Archives of American Art with Krauss and McCoy a few months after Smith's death in May 1965, Daner said, "He did tell me that when he was 3 years old, he was being punished when he was a little boy and taken because he used to run away, and he was tied to a tree with a length of rope so that he wouldn't run off, and there was a mud puddle there, and he made a lion out of mud when he was 3 years old. And it was so remarkable and so lion-like that his mother was delighted with it and called in the neighbors to look at this wonderful lion that little David had done. And he told me he got the idea of the lion from pictures he'd seen in his grandmother's Bible, which he still had up in Bolton Landing. And there were pictures, tiny pictures of ruins in Egypt and so on, and hieroglyphics, and that's how we got the idea of the lion." "And he remembered doing that?" McCoy asked. "And he remembered doing this, oh yes," Daner responded. And that was his first sculpture, of course. Daner told the story again in 1987 in an interview with Maureen Bloomfield and Patricia Rennick. She said that during her first visit to Paulding in 1932, it wasn't until 5 years after their marriage that she finally met his family. Smith's mother, Golda Stoller, remembered, quote, "very fondly and told me that David had a habit of running to his grandmother's house. He adored his grandmother, so she'd tie a long length of rope to him, to a tree. He could run over the property, but he couldn't go down to Grandma's or up. He was there, and under the tree was a mud puddle. David was 3, and he molded a lion in the mud, from the mud, and Mother Smith saw it, and she was so excited. She was very appreciative of this, and she called in the neighbors to look at it. She told me this story herself." In the same 1987 interview, Daner said, "I asked him where he got the idea. He said, from my grandmother's Bible. Then at some point he decided that that Bible should be him when we were out in Paulding, and he took it with him, because he did love his grandmother, and in the back were some colored photographs, or lithos, or something. I don't know how they illustrated in those days, what technique, but they were pictures of Assyrian lions, those Assyrian things. He was very struck with those. And there were some architectural things, too, that were exhibited. There must have been 6 or 7 pages of that." Smith referred to the mud lion once. In Sculpture Is, a stream of consciousness prose poem he wrote in early 1947 when he was 40 for the catalog of his exhibition at Manhattan's Willard Gallery. Sculpture Is begins, "My year AD 4. God and Father, moving forms, ice cream flower odors, fears. Year 5 is one incident, praise from a grandmother for a mud pie lion. The chronology continues through year 7. When it hits year AD 7, declarations, reverences pour forth. Sculpture is the dialectic of survival, everything I sought, everything I seek, what I will die not finding. These are the last 4 lines. Sculpture is, in another Smith text in the Willard catalog, the landscape, were reprinted in reduced form in the one issue of Possibilities, conceived in 1947 by the painter Robert Motherwell and the art critic Harold Rosenberg. In Possibilities, God and Father was omitted. So the first line reads, my year AD 4, moving forms, ice cream, flower odors, fears. The title of the landscape was changed to, I have never looked at a landscape. Its chain of visceral, often cryptic, and occasionally overwrought associations begins. I have never looked at a landscape without seeing other landscapes. I have never seen a landscape without visions of things I desire and despise. Lower landscapes have crusts of heat-raw epidermis and the choke of vines. The separate lines of salt eras, monadnocks of fungus, the balance of stone with gestures to grow. It has faces I do not know, its mountains are always sobbing females, or 2 other lines. The catalog included a third and shorter text, Spectres Are, another stream of associations around the theme. It begins, the race for survival, the capital dog. This text, Possibilities, did not reprint. Dana may have understood better than anyone else what made Smith tick as an artist, so when she emphasized the importance of the story of the Mud Lion, it's worth paying attention. But how? The story is almost irresistible in its mixture of captivity and creativity, fantasy and trauma. But how can we interpret an event that we know only through its tellings? We don't know when, how often, or in what circumstances Smith told Dana the story. We can't know the size, attitude, or look of the lion, or what happened to it. In one of Dana's tellings, the lion was inspired by an Egyptian image, in the other, an Assyrian one. In Sculpture Is, Smith is 2 years older than in Dana's remembrances of the event. In Smith's reference, the decisive recognition comes not from Mother Smith, as Dana referred to her, the designation of earthy piety with which Smith's mother usually signed her letters to Dana after she, Dana, and Smith's sister Catherine cemented their bond following Smith's death. In Sculpture Is, the recognition comes from Golda's mother, Catherine Stoller. These discrepancies and gaps, these obstacles, are in fact generative. They are what make exploration possible. So what was going on around the time Smith wrote Sculpture Is? Krauss wrote that in 1946, Dana introduced Smith to Dr. Bernard Gluck, a former analysand of Freud who summered near Glens Falls, half an hour from Bolton Landing. The analyst and Smith became good friends. According to Dana's report, Dr. Gluck spent hours with Smith in his studio while Smith worked, and they talked together. So we know from this that Smith was thinking about Freud when he decided in 1947 to construct his origins. In his first essay in 1940 on abstract art, Smith had described Freud as, quote, the greatest single influence on the theoretical side of art, providing an analytical system for establishing the reality of the unconscious, the region of the mind from which the artist derives his inspiration. From letters, we know as well that the World War II years had been brutal for him. Life was dark, materials hard to come by. It wasn't until near the end of the war that Smith was sure he wouldn't be drafted. For more than 2 years, he worked the graveyard shift, building tanks and locomotives at the American Locomotive Company in Schenectady, New York. In correspondences, Dana remarked that at moments during the Schenectady years, Smith's energy, which to her and many others was almost superhuman, was depleted. After a period of volcanic distress in 1945, when Dana went to New York City and left him for the first time, Smith's probing of his roots required him to discharge associations so that he could connect where he had come from and who he was in a post-war world in which reality was altered. It's conceivable that Smith may have told Dana that the event happened at 3, and then after introspection, perhaps after talking with Gluck, decided that it occurred when he was 5. It seems to me that at 5 he would have been more likely to have been conscious of and acted on an image in his grandmother's Bible. It was during his 5th year, in 1911, that his sister was born. Given his need for attention and his mother's discomfort with his masculinity and with masculinity in general, his sister's birth may have made him feel even more unsafe at home. From the work Smith made in the 40s, we know that in the years after his father's death in 1939, particularly around 1945, his feelings about his mother were bitter. My year AD 7 in Sculpture begins, the found book of nude marble women hidden by a school-teaching Methodist mother. The reference to mothers and specters is derisive. The mother's love, the ass's jaw, he wrote. In 1947, his 1947 exhibition included a 1946 sculpture called Spectre of Mother. Mark? His extraordinary 1945 Pillar of Sunday is a 2.5-foot tall columnar steel slab. Like a Christmas tree, the body of the frontal female figure is adorned, in this case with miniature sculptures evoking Sunday dinner, a wagon with 2 children, a garden, church, and a heart worn on the limb, or perhaps a sleeve. Perched on the head is a bird with a man's head, its wings outstretched, resembling an early plane. The surface is swathed with red paint. The figure is statuesque, but also comically absurd. It's both forbidding and impinged, impaled, violated. It seems like a Christian idol that has become a fetish or a totem. Given the feelings of adoration and desecration expressed here, it's not hard to understand Smith's excising of his mother from his mudlion reference while singling out his grandmother's praise. In fact, since his grandmother lived several blocks away, she probably could have only learned about the mudlion from Golda. In all likelihood, Golda was the first to admire it. The Bible Smith stole from his mother's house may yet resurface. Since Assyrian sculpture includes some of the most forgettable images of lions in the history of art, including the heroically wounded lioness in the 7th century BC relief in the British Museum, I'm sure the biblical source was Assyrian. As important to an understanding of Smith's work as any insight that might be provided by the actual source is the knowledge that the art historical inspiration did not come from classical and Hellenistic Greece. Instead of reading him bedtime stories when he was a child, Smith's mother read to him from a sanctimoniously proselytizing book on Greek sculpture, in which Greek art was lauded as the apex of decency, morality, and civilization. The mud lion was inspired by an older and more hieratic cultural tradition, one in which sculpture was defined by frontality, planarity, and a powerful awareness of figure-ground relationships, an ancient precedent for the development of positive-negative space in Cubism. In Sculpture my year AD 7, Smith refers with campfire relish to ancient Near Eastern myths. For example, the fight between the monster Tiamat, personification of chaos, darkness, disorder, evil, and Marduk, god of light, and Assyrian cuneiform, where water is the parent of all things, where universal darkness reigns, where gods have been forgotten. In 1951, Smith wrote, I was trained in the Cubist world concept, but before I could read, had pondered over cuneiform. My first conscious interests were the illustrations in the Bible of cuneiform, which impressed me more than the word language I later learned to read. I have always been more Assyrian than Cubist. In Europe, in the years just before and after Smith was born, archaic art had a formative artistic impact. For Picasso, the most significant artist for Smith and the rest of his abstract expressionist generation, the art of the ancient Near East helped inspire the Demoiselles d'Avignon and the invention of Cubism. Before they took off for the Virgin Islands for 9 months in the fall of 1931, Dana and Smith read Gauguin's Noah Noah, the journal of his life in Tahiti. They too wanted, in Dana's words, to chuck off civilization. Gauguin revered Egyptian and other planar and ceremonial non-Western art. He referred to the abominable era of naturalism, which began with the Greeks of Pericles. Since then, the more or less great artists have been only those who in one way or another reacted against this era. Smith's mud lion was a dramatic response to subjugation by a civic-minded, do-gooder Methodist mother who did not have the means to deal with her son's unruly energy and discomfort with her. In a situation defined by his desire for his grandmother's refuge and his mother's forcible detainment of him, he modeled the sculpture of the king of the jungle, an assertion of unmistakable but exotic animality that was less threatening than his actual wildness. The mud lion emerged as a result of Smith's resourceful openness to the materials at hand. It communicated its impact outdoors. The admiration of his mud lion let him know that his sculptural imagination was more palatable to the rest of his family than his impetuous behavior. His mother may not have known how to cope with him or how to understand his desire to flee home, but she could admire what he made. Mud was part of Smith's artistic consciousness. In 3 published writings in the 40s, he referred to mud as the first sculptural and architectural material. In 1947, writing about his welded steel sculpture, Cockfight, he wrote, "This project is not a historic departure, for art throughout the ages has been made from the same materials and borne the same tool marks as industry and architecture. The truth is evident from man's history through mud, stone, Bronze Ages, all the way to our present alloy age." He began tradition and identity in 1959 talk at Ohio University, where he spent a miserable freshman year, by remembering his childhood. Mostly art was reproduction from far away, from an age past and from some golden shore, certainly from no place like the mud banks of the Orglades or the Maumee, the rivers. And there didn't seem much chance that it could come from Paulding County. In the original transcript of The Secret Letter, his interview with the art critic and editor Thomas B. Hess in June 1964, Smith remembered he wrote a paper he wrote as a high school sophomore on Darwin's Descent of Man. In a number of the sculptures he made in the immediate aftermath of the war, of which the 1945 Jurassic bird is the best known, the oscillized prehistoric seems as alive as dead, and life arises from and is forever marked by its emergence from primal ooze. Smith's and Dana's life together in Bolton Landing was austere, even raw. It ensured that each day they would not forget that existence was a struggle for survival. This awareness and the idea of natural selection never stopped shaping Smith's art and life. What's most affecting to me in the tellings of the Mud Lion story is their absences, their silences. In neither of Dana's narrations is there criticism of Golda's behavior. To Golda, who like her husband Harv, had grown up with a frontier mentality, her act seems to have been natural. Your boy threatens to run away, you leash him to a tree like a dog or horse, any parent would do it. Certainly one with a son like David Smith. Dana was empathetic with Smith's unhappiness as a child. She mentioned to Krauss and McCoy the quantity of scars on his body, and astute in their analysis of the impact on him of his experience of childhood injustice. But during her report of Golda's telling, she does not ask, how could Golda have done this? What did his grandmother offer him that his mother and father couldn't? Perhaps the lack of scrutiny of an abusive act can be explained by the knowledge that Dana was abused by Smith, and that both she and Golda felt at the mercy of his rages. The gaps in Smith's reference are no less poignant. Smith mentions the Mud Lion, but not its circumstances. The text is structured so that the previous word, the end of year 4, immediately before praise for a grandmother, for a mud pie lion, is fierce. Krauss defined as one of the characteristics of Smith's sculpture that, quote, the logical relationships among the parts remains obscure. The mysterious fusion of dependence and disjunction in Smith's sculptural syntax is a key to his difficulty in modernity. In all 3 Smith texts in the 1947 Willard catalog, words and phrases seem asserted yet broken. Images, memories, slices of narrative lurch, turn, yet somehow attach. Transition is maintained, but it's in perpetual crisis. Describing Raymond Carver's small-town childhood in the 1940s in the state of Washington in a recently published biography of the American short story writer, Carol Sklenecka writes that Carver's mother, quote, "Ella literally kept Raymond on a tight leash. When he grew up, one friend listened in amazement as he egged his mother on to tell stories about his early childhood. One of them was taking him into town on a leash. She never broke character because that was her character. If you said, 'a leash,' she said without irony, 'well, of course I had to keep him on a leash.'" Toward the end of the book, Sklenecka writes that Carver, who for years would be a catastrophic and to his first wife occasionally abusive alcoholic, quote, "promised the publisher Knopf a new book of short stories to be edited by Gottlieb. This commitment he regarded as being back in harness, as opposed to the freedom of writing poems that he'd enjoyed since he turned in Cathedral in 1983. "I like a harness, by the way. I think it's the thing for me," he wrote Tobias Wolff. Sklenecka wrote in 1986, 2 years before his death at 50, Carver, quote, "complained again to Carlyle that the fishing had been terrible. Salmon runs declined sharply in the 1980s, and that he needed a shrink to help him deal with his mother. Let him get my couch ready. Let the doctor prepare to listen carefully. He may never hear such a story again," Ray wrote. So how does all this lead into art criticism? Clement Greenberg was Smith's most influential supporter, the critic with whom he's still most identified. In January 1943, Greenberg wrote in The Nation, "Smith is 36. If he's able to maintain the level set in the work he's already done, of which other fine examples may be seen in the back room of the Willard Gallery, he has a chance of becoming one of the greatest of all American artists." In his review of the 1947 Willard show, Greenberg wrote, "In my opinion, Smith is already one of the great 20th century sculptors anywhere, deserving to stand next to Brancusi, Lipschitz, Giacometti, Gonzalez, not to mention Laurence and Moore. That he's making an absolute contribution to the development of the world as well as American art. The course of sculpture in other countries will be affected by what he's doing." Over more than 20 years, Greenberg's writing on Smith was characteristically evaluative, economical, comparative in its analysis of his work with and against Cubism, and insistent on the primacy of formal inventiveness. The work does not stand on its symbolism, but on its formal energy, for which the symbolism is only a springboard, Greenberg wrote in the 1943 review. Greenberg did not do interviews with artists. He protected his critical authority and distance. He tended to dismiss what critics wrote. He wanted little or no part of the literary, anecdotal, biographical, mythical, or metaphysical, or of anything else that could corrupt or sentimentalize the intensity of the most contemporary aesthetic experience. He took risks for his convictions and could be brilliant in making aesthetic connections and articulating his sensations, but he insisted on strict boundaries. His essay on Smith, published in the catalog for his 1964 exhibition at the Institute of Contemporary Art in Philadelphia, ended with these fateful words. "Felicity comes more easily to Smith than it used to, but it's still by no means an easy felicity. I am not able to talk about the content of Smith's art because I'm no more able to find words for it than for the ultimate content of Corsia's or Rodin's art. But I can see that Smith's felicities are won from a wealth of content, of things to say, and this is the hardest and most lasting way in which they can be won. The burden of content is what keeps an artist going, and the wonderful thing about Smith is the way that burden seems to grow with his years instead of shrinking. I wonder what it's like for an artist to feel gratitude for a critic's insight and support, while seeing that critic avoid the most substantial challenges of his or her work, and in fact discipline and sanitize them through critical language. I wonder what Smith thought of Greenberg's slipperiness in declaring that he could not talk about the content of his work because he could not talk about ultimate content, which is an entirely different matter. The abstract expressionist critic, who more than any other was comfortable with the personhood and the words and ideas of artists, and took seriously the relationship between their lives and works, is Hess. In 1951, as managing editor of Art News, he commissioned Elaine de Kooning to write David Smith Makes a Sculpture, for which Smith prepared an eloquent statement about his working process and the patterns of his life. I like my solitude, black coffee, and daydreams, he wrote. I like the changes of nature. No 2 days or nights are the same. In Broken, what was nature was all man-made and mechanical, but I like both. I like the companionship of music. I sometimes get WNYC, but always WQXR, Montreal, Vancouver, or Toronto. I use the music as company in the manual labor part of sculpture, of which there is much. The workflow of energy demanded by sculpture, wherein mental exhaustion is accompanied by physical exhaustion, provides the only balance I've ever found, and as far as I know, is the only way of life. In 1962, Hess's Art News published Frank O'Hara's essay on Smith that makes a point of the poetry of the sculptures filling the fields around Smith's house and studio. O'Hara's essay ends with the unforgettable line, "The best of the current sculptures didn't make me feel I wanted to have one. They made me feel I wanted to be one." 4 months after the publication of Greenberg's essay for the ICA, Hess interviewed Smith for the catalog for his fall 1964 exhibition at the Marlborough Gallery, in which Smith included his abstract stainless steel cubeyes, along with his raw, weird, and occasionally lubricious squirted enamel paintings of female nudes. The combination of abstract and figurative, pristine and nearly pornographic, a brash, even impudent assertion of artistic impurity and deviance. In the interview, Smith roamed all over. He referred to James Joyce, John Cage, Morton Feldman, Igor Stravinsky, New York in the 30s, Calvinism, pussy, his word, socialism, and totem and taboo. He spoke about his heritage. Physically, I'm scared something is going to happen, that I'm not going to have enough to eat. Once you've lived through a depression, Thomas, I don't think you can outgrow it. But your father had enough money and you were raised, Smith interrupted. I was raised with enough food, but I came from pioneer people. Grandmothers and grandfathers, great-grandmother, my great-grandmother, all of those people I talked with were early settlers. They'd been deprived of salt, flour, sugar, and staples like that for periods of time. I came directly from pioneer people who were scared for survival, and this reinforced my consciousness of the Depression. So here again, a year before Smith's death, is fear. In this interview, Smith wanted to leave no doubt about his curiosity, knowledge, bravado, and courage, as well as his sense of vulnerability, even if he could only hint at its increasingly invasive extremeness. All this has bearing on the content of his work and how it is experienced. Yet it was partly through the repudiation of Hess's Art News that Art Forum in October would build the foundations that for generations would define rigorous and self-aware, serious art criticism. In his essay, Art Critics and Extremists, anthologized in his 2002 book, Design and Crime and Other Diatribes, art critic and art historian Hal Foster, an October editor, wrote, "For the critics who most marked Art Forum, first Michael Fried and Barbara Rose, then Annette Michelson and Krauss, Rosenberg was all fustian writing, an aspersion that they also cast at poet critics like Frank O'Hara and John Ashbery, and later Peter Schaldau and Carter Ratcliffe, associated with Art News under the editor Tom Hess. This was not art criticism as a serious discipline." Are the 3 Smith texts to which Hess contributed, 2 as an editor, the 3rd as interviewer, less essential to an understanding of Smith than Greenberg's canonizing essays? For me, no. The contributions are different. The Secret Letter remains one of the best artist interviews I know. Its urgency was fed by Smith's longing to be heard in terms that reflected the fullness of his identity. After 1951, it was on this word, identity, that Smith leaned more than on any other. He couldn't have done that interview with anyone else. Trust and friendship are obviously important to pretty much all artists, but they were crucial to the exiles of Smith's abstract expressionist generation, and to Smith in his Bolton Landing remoteness. This generation came of age when avant-garde artists were still outcasts in America, and there was barely an art system. Trust and friendship are issues of biography. Like the notion of family, they are not external to the formation and transmission of the creative process. One reason why I was drawn to biography is that I knew it would oblige me to exist in the boundary between life and art. With Smith, this boundary was never firm. It is work, it is never a clear line. I'm not sure anyone can map this threshold, but artists appreciate its messiness and volatility, and they know they must perpetually negotiate it. The story of the mud lion becomes an event when its boundaries dissolve, and it becomes a scene that it's impossible but essential to inhabit. Okay, we take a 5-minute break. Thank you. And the artist's name, Asha Gaudavanayas, and she's the artist. It's 9 minutes. In Webster's New World College Dictionary, potential is listed first as an adjective and defined as one that has power, potent, two, that can, but has not yet come into being, possible, latent, unrealized, undeveloped, three, expressing possibility, capability, power, etc. Potential awaits materialization. The potential of art is a phrase that leads into art and into the interaction with it, into the substances, realities, desires, and processes of art, and the substances, realities, desires, and processes of people encountering it. Where these interactions take place is indispensable. Galleries, museums, and international biennials are obvious art sites. Magazines, each one too, an institution with its own ideas of good and bad in art, its own conventions of display, are art sites as well. So are studios, classrooms, apartments, and public events like this one, which in their openness to the unexpected have a greater chance to discover rather than reauthorize stories, or to become situations rather than plots, to use a distinction made by Walter Benjamin. For me, the key word in the Webster's definition is potent. Although this word has a strong gender connotation, and it's possible a woman would not feel as strongly as I do the pull of this word, I don't respond to it as gender specific. I find potency as much in the art of women as in the art of men. Potency opens into other words, such as energy, danger, obsession, and boldness. Art that seems to be emanating a potent desire or knowledge to which I feel joined, while only minimally being able to articulate that attachment, makes me an offer I refuse at my peril. Embracing that offer always requires a struggle with language. While searching for the appropriate words, which may take years, and contributions from other art, books, students, and friends, the art, as it is becoming known, can inform a multitude of interactions. Connection can become continuation, intuition, idea, experience, form. Most significant artists since 1850 have imagined their audiences not as consumers of art, but as co-authors, co-producers of it. Even those artists who rail against words, and there are many in the history of modernism, know that without words, art would not persist and transformation could not happen. Without the assumption of art's potency, many Americans would not still dread artists. And many other Americans who are strangers to modern and contemporary art would not welcome proximity to artists and embrace artistic projects that require their collaboration. Max Raphael, the Prussian-born art historian of prehistoric and modern art, understood the foundational importance of personal connection. In his essay, The Struggle to Understand Art, he wrote, "Only when a living contact, however vague or unconscious, has been established with the work of art, can explanation be meaningful." In the 1930 preface to the first draft of the 1968 book, The Demands of Art, in which that essay appears, as well as formally specific and yet far-reaching explorations of works by Cézanne, Degas, Giotto, and Picasso, Raphael wrote, "Seeing is a psychic activity, not merely of the eyes, but of the person as a whole. It is not an abstract activity, the same for everyone, everywhere, in every age, but a highly concrete one, which is determined, among other ways, by the cultural attitudes, both of the individual and of the given historical epoch." For Raphael, that living contact itself required investigation. He knew, however, that only the most intense respect for the concreteness of the thing in front of him could yield decisive insight into controlling assumptions and conditions. Understanding the processes of making and experiencing the particularity of art within social and economic systems was an indispensable task that he knew to be dynamic and unstable. To look or see is at the same time to project inner feelings, visions, dreams, etc., gradually assimilating them to individual objects or to the world in general. The two processes may diverge or they may converge, and in highly varying degrees. Raphael understood the impact of language. Every work of art is a storehouse of creative energies, he wrote. This text will try to set them free, and in so doing to release spiritual forces in the viewer of art. However, what use the reader makes of them and to what end is something if a people is not to cease being a cultural community. In his 2007 book, Magical Criticism, The Recourse of Savage Philosophy, Christopher Bracken wrote that Walter Benjamin suggests that a properly magical criticism does not decipher the meaning of an artwork. Instead, it brings it to life. Interpretation is therefore animation. Reading is resurrection. The soul of the work slumbers until the critic arrives to awaken it. In his 1930 preface, Raphael wrote this remarkable sentence: "As a vessel formed by the creative forces which it preserves, the work of art keeps alive and enhances every urge to come to terms with the world." When I spoke with the Phillips Collection in July about its October symposium, I just visited the studio of Maria Masha Godevanaya, a first-year film video student in the Milton Avery Graduate School of the Arts, Bard College's master's degree studio art program. The program, in which Mark is assistant director, is structured around one-hour studio visits, which the program calls conferences. Faculty members are expected to visit with 3 or 4 students a day. Each faculty member works closely with his or her department, mine is sculpture, but we visit as well with students in the 5 other disciplines, which in my case are painting, photography, film, video, writing, and music sound. Since that studio visit led me to accept the Phillips invitation to participate in its 2009 symposium, I need to describe it. Before the visit, I knew nothing about Masha or her work. Since I take off the 4th and 5th weeks of the 8-week June and July program, I'd missed her presentation to the rest of the faculty and the 80 or so other students. On her computer in her small windowless studio, she showed me what she had projected for them. 2 projectors transmitted huge images, roughly 15 feet wide and 10 feet tall, nearly covering the wall on the other side of the room. The film began with written questions in white letters scrolling down the left half of the black screen. They appeared in Russian on top and in English below. "What are you doing? What are you shooting? What are you shooting, Mom? What, are you shooting me? Hey, are you shooting me? I can see myself." The scrolling down continued for a couple of minutes. Soon after it ended, an image appeared of a well-ordered and dimly lit room that had the compositional spareness of a Dutch still life. The mirror against the far wall revealed a window with daylight pouring through, a curtained door alongside it, and a couple of plants. The shadowy brownish palette, no yellows, oranges, or blues, made the atmosphere thick and muted. A boy entered. He was wearing a white turtleneck and dark V-neck sweater. He moved about, performing for the camera, querying the woman, his mother, who was shooting him. His movements were audible. At moments he seemed to be having a fine time, to be in his element, flattered by the attention, but the person behind the camera did not respond to his questions, and he was periodically uncertain if he was intended to be the star, and if the scene. Sometimes his body language was awkward, if not slightly monstrous, particularly when he moved close to the camera and peered into it. After a few minutes, the woman ordered him to get out of the frame. Eventually he left, and stillness returned. A couple of seconds after this scene began, on the right half of the screen, another film appeared. The faded and grainy black and white footage focused on a few boys and one girl, all a few years older than the boy in the apartment, but still children. Ragged and subdued, although filmed outdoors, they had no freedom. A guard in uniform with helmet and gun ordered them to shake from their shirts the stuff they had stored in them. They noticed the camera. A couple of them appealed to it. Some of the footage was stained, damaged. The film was silent. Even more than in the other film, its purposes were unclear. This older footage was looped and in decidedly slow motion. Then both films disappeared. On the right side of the screen, a text explained that the Nazis had a vacation program. With their limited number of holidays, German citizens could, the text indicated, vacation at the beach or in the mountains or explore our homeland. According to the text, a visit to Warsaw Ghetto was included in one of the KDF, Kraft durch Freude, Strength Through Joy, tourist trips. This text had been shot on a tourist trip to the Warsaw Ghetto. A German man or woman had photographed its prisoners as a souvenir. What I had been watching for 9 minutes was two home movies, one staged more than 60 years after the earlier one in response to it. While watching, Masha and I talked. I learned that she was from Moscow and had lived in the St. Petersburg apartment in the first footage with her husband and 6-year-old son, Timothy, the boy in the film. She mentioned her interest in Ellen Renee's 1955 black and white documentary Night in Fog, one of the first films to put into general circulation the horrors of the concentration camps. She also mentioned Harun Faraki's 1988 film, Images of the World and the Inscription of War, which includes Allied and Nazi photographs of the concentration camp at Auschwitz and underlines photography's ability to revere, reveal, confuse, and abuse. Masha referred to an upsurge of fascism in her country, the seriousness of which has intensified since our July meeting. In response to my expression of distress about the human penchant for the same old patterns, the hardwired human disposition to perpetuate the most awful scripts, she responded that it was now commonplace for people to have their pictures taken smiling at the entrance to Auschwitz. I said that one of the aspects of the multicultural moment of the early 90s with which I was in complete sympathy was the caution on which it insisted when taking photographs of other people, as opposed to now when hardly anyone feels any reservation about taking pictures of anyone else, anywhere, anytime, without asking, and then putting the images online. She agreed. Her project was unfinished. She was unsure if it was an installation or a film. She was trying to determine which information to provide about it and in what way. It was not clear to me what its ideal site would be. I had no idea how the film would be experienced by 120 people seeing it on a wall, and little sense of the impact of the finished version. Evaluating the film without respecting the connection I felt with it would have been a self-destructive endeavor. Masha made clear that she wanted the film to be catalytic. In order for it to realize its potential, it had to provoke exchange. Tourist pictures of the Warsaw Ghetto, the impact of the camera eye, not just on human behavior, but also, increasingly, amid what the curator Okwi Enwezor has referred to as the suffocation of images, on the construction of human nature. I couldn't get out of my mind the confusion of Masha's son. Was he free or used? And the juxtaposition of his confident appeal to the camera with that of the muffled appeal of the children in the Warsaw Ghetto. In this film, which is what Masha has decided it is, no one can know anyone else for sure, not even a mother her son, or a son his mother, and the catastrophic past is pervasively present. These are enormous, potent issues. In response to an email I sent her shortly after our meeting, Masha wrote, "The question, 'Who are you shooting?' is addressed to me, but I'm addressing him my silent question with my camera, 'Who are you? Who are you I'm shooting?' I would imagine there's a curiosity in the German tourist position too, but it's a brutal one, and there's an arrogant confidence. He was 100% confident of how dirty and insignificant these kids were, and he was sure what future they had, or would deserve. If he had had a different opinion, he wouldn't get a ticket for this trip and spend his vacation in the ghetto. Masha also wrote, "As viewers, we know about the fate of these children. It was fatal, but we know it. Nobody knows the fate of my son, even me. So it's an open question. And this confusion and uncertainty my camera somehow may express." The studio encounter formulated a constellation of questions. What and where is the work? What does it want from me? What do I want from it? What is the relationship between the encounter that initiates a project, which I imagine to be Masha's discovery of the archival footage, and the issues that ripple out from that event as the work takes form? Some questions are familiar to every museum. What do viewers need to know in order to have the most substantial possible experience of art? And how should this knowledge be communicated so as to have the best chance to release its potential? The film can be approached aesthetically, biographically, politically, anthropologically, archaeologically, historically, and art historically. Each of these frames provides its own perspective. Each privileges a particular language. What is the effect on the potential of art when these languages are territorialized? These languages are territorialized, walled in. Critics, of which I am one, are likely to ask about success and failure. They may try to relate Masha's film to others situated within her development as an artist and do justice to their experience of it. Scholars, of which I am one, may research the uses of World War II footage, the traditions of the home movie, which archives the footage came from, and what other films are in it, at what point in the history of the Warsaw Ghetto this home movie was shot, and whether this footage adds to our understanding of its abundantly researched history. Perhaps they would also try to identify the children. They might ask why Masha selected this footage. They would situate the film within 2009 Russia. The general art public, of which I'm also one, may be interested in all this, but would be more likely to respond to the film from their own experiences and histories. At any time, certainly now, there's no substitute for rigorous standards of seriousness and knowledge, but I don't believe the potential of any art can be realized within a professional or institutional language. At the heart of Masha's film, I think, is a crisis of alignment. Nothing in the film fits together, not the Russian and English subtitles, not the queries of the boy and the silences in command of his mother, not the generational divide in the ghetto as well, not the children in the ghetto and anything else in that footage, including the abyss of disproportionate power between the tourist camera and the pending ghetto annihilation. The film produced or located in me a sense of radical incommensurability, and with it an acute sense of deficiency and disorder that convinced me I had to move toward it. The answers to the questions raised by the film are not in it. Where are they? I'm sure I'm not alone here in feeling that with some art I need a solitary relationship. With some art I need exchanges with friends. With some art it's essential for me to shut up and listen to what others think. With some art I need a public forum. With some art I need all these possibilities of interaction. In 2010, we have so many ways of accepting art's offer. Thank you. So if you have responses, questions, Mark, can you get the light? Okay. Please, I'd love to hear them. Does that mean you all want to get something to eat, or you just pause it? Yes.
In preparing for tonight, using the horrible internet, stumbled on one of your articles from New York Magazine. photography as being one and the same, as opposed to his earlier work, which was more personal, quote, more pure. And in fact, I think your point, if I understood it, was his earlier work was more artistic than his commercial work. Now, the International Center for Photography just had an exhibit of his fashion photography and presented it pretty much as art. I'm wondering if over time, if you have changed your view of personal work versus commercial work, and blended together, or in fact is personal art different from commercial art?
Well, the question, I don't know if you heard it, but it was about something I wrote back in 2000, because I spent the fall writing reviews for New York Magazine, and it was a review of an Edward Steichen show at the Whitney, and I guess it was some kind of contrast that I made between the more commercial side and the more artistic side, and made a judgment that the more artistic side was a sort of more legitimate and more substantial way of proceeding, and the question was whether I still felt that way. And God, I don't even remember the review. But I don't have like an absolute position about that. I mean, it's not like I feel something is intrinsically more valuable if it seems to be coming out of what seems to be, you know, a more pure aesthetic position, and then if you move in the realm of the commercial world, that it loses something, or it is inherently diminished. It probably would be worthwhile for me to see it again. I think that I felt when I was looking at the work that they just had much less to offer to me, the work that he made in relation to fashion, but that also could be me. It just felt much shallower, but if you look at it in their own terms, in a different framework, I'm sure they have their own substance to them. I don't know if I would change my mind, but anyway, I would go see it again, and I don't have an ideological position in relation to the commercial and the aesthetic.
I was thinking more in general, commercial versus personal art, given the media today and all the different ways that we see art. And it's so hard sometimes to even tell what is commercial and what is personal. Where are you these days versus at least one narrower opinion you had back then?
Again, I feel very unideologically about it, and like you say, in this kind of world now, that there's so much crossover, and there's so much desire on the part of younger artists, if I can generalize, to actually reach an audience, to have people respond in the real world, that these boundaries for them don't exist, and if they can find a way to affect or be part of a conversation about fashion, or you know, affect what's going on in there, I think a lot of them will grab it, and that's fine with me. I mean, I'm just interested in what they do, not in like a priori position in relation to it. Yeah.
Michael, could you say a little bit more? I mean, this is what this has been all about maintaining a position of openness. I mean, this is, I think, one of the great things I like about your criticism. And going back to Clement Greenberg, for instance, you know, if you read his original reviews in The Nation, they're so much better than the Art and Culture, which he claimed was a reprint, but it isn't. It's a rewriting of the reviews. You kept an open attitude. I think, to me, it's a great strength. I want you to say a little bit more about that.
Gosh. I guess, I mean, first of all, I want to learn, you know. I mean, growth seems to me like everything. And if there's something, I feel like if there's something I can learn from what I'm dealing with or looking at, that's great. I'm aware that there's certain things I can attach to immediately, and there's certain limits. And so it's interesting to me to try to go beyond those limits. And those moments some of the greatest moments is it, like for me as a critic, or probably for an art historian, or when you find yourself able to respond to people who are completely alien to you at one time. And maybe that's part of it too, maybe finding that people like Warhol and Bruce Nauman, who at a certain point in my life I wasn't very interested in, and then suddenly something clicks and they become really important to you, and like a world opens up through that. So it's based on the sense of what can happen in this sense of discovery, you know. And I'm not uncritical at all, but those conversations in the studio too, where you go in, you close the door, you don't know what's going to happen. You're faced with work, so you're faced with an actual person too. You're faced with a kind of living history, and all of it is in front of you. So what happens? And then something can happen that's completely unforeseen. And I don't want to get corny about it, but I think it's great. And I think it's very hard. One of the reasons why I take that position against Greenberg, although I think he's a great critic, unquestionably, is I think that kind of notion of criticism and authority and judgment, it's very difficult in this world, obviously, right? For anybody to feel that kind of authority about anything. So somewhere you also need other people. You need a kind of, there's truth for me in a convergence of voices, much more than in just my own voice. Yeah.
Somewhat related to that, I'm wondering about the mud line, which I love, by the way.
Thank you.
And I don't know if this is a fair statement or not, but as I heard it, in a sense you were telling the creation myth for David Smith, but by your retelling, in a way, this is why you're doing biography now. It's the myth that allows you to do biography in a meaningful way that is fully as significant as Greenberg would never touch that side. And I think, you know, especially in terms of art history these days, biography is still a touchy subject here.
Right.
Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, I think it's smart, and I mean, Smith was such a mythical figure, and he was so smart about mythical ways of thinking and so interested in it. And if you're around artists, they do construct themselves anyway. Usually, really, I wouldn't say all of them, but a lot of them do that. And he really needed to do that. So that was attached to his own creation myth. But it's interesting to think about that way with all its problematics, which I hope it raised too. Because
well, the very fact you felt compelled to tell it. Yeah.
Right. Well, I find it. You know, I'm also interested. I mean, there's a lot of sort of back stuff here. I'm interested in the notion of an image. I'm interested in, like, at what point something becomes an image. And the mud line for me, like the 3 words, and then you build a story around it. Somehow I have a confidence that, like nobody in this room, you may forget to talk, but the mud lion is going to stick. So that there's something about, and so how does that happen? And maybe that can get back to a creation myth in some way, at least thinking about that. But and I'm very interested in how words affect that.
Because that is the thing. It is the image. It's also the telling, and it's the ritual.
Right. All of which should become part of the telling somehow. And the fact that it's an image that can only exist in words. It's like it's a visual image, but no one's going to come up with it on their cell phone, right? It's not going to wind up on YouTube. It's something that we're kind of always, it's a powerful thing that exists through words and a visual image back there, but never a visual image out there. And what is the relationship between the power of that kind of visual image and the power of a visual image that you look at, you know, on the internet and you can see 100 times? And I can't sort of engage that question, but it's a really important question for me.
I was struck by the fact that you didn't attempt to show us the image of the Syrian.
Of the what?
Of the Syrian line.
Right. Although I wondered if I'd made a mistake by not doing that.
There was a real potency in doing it.
Right.
That is a potent moment.
Well, the first time I told the talk, when I gave the talk, which was quite different, there were no images at all. Yeah.
I want you to be an authority here. Do you feel that there's a 21st century aesthetic that is somehow different from the late 20th century aesthetic? Like up until 1975? Is there a postmodern aesthetic that takes into account something more than the modernist aesthetic? How am I to judge art that's being made now as opposed to art that was being made in 1960? You don't have to answer all those questions all at the same time.
I think when you look at David Smith, and one of the questions I ask myself as a teacher, like what is available in that work now? When I show the images to artists, they care about them, but you can't do that work now, probably. So why can't you do that work? And if you can't, like if David Smith were in 2010, what would he be doing? He probably wouldn't be doing the same thing, but it's very hard, that relationship to materials, a kind of mythology of materials that he had, you know, with steel and their relation to industry and labor and their relationship, the way steel comes out of the earth, which itself has such a long history, and the particular way in which there's a belief system behind that work that I'm very sympathetic with, but it's kind of not available now. And it's not really answering your question, but that would be the conversation for me with people, with young artists who are interested in that, in this now. Like, how do you think about that, and how do you think about making? Given that there's a whole like mythology that he had, which worked for him, which people can't believe in now. There's been too much consciousness, too much written, too much analysis. So that's a little bit part of it, and then there's the whole question of digital technology, which I can't even begin to get into, but the way in which video has become like drawing for people of earlier in the 20th century, and there are very few artists I work with that don't turn to it at some point and feel that they have to work something out in relationship to it. And I don't know what I feel about it, but it's irrelevant anyway. What I feel about it, it's a reality. And then that creates, you know, that sort of moving image, that relationship to the image, that relationship to the internet. It creates a different view of the world and a different generational discussion. So I can't answer your question like how to look at things now. But that's one of the reasons why I do a lot of listening. You know, I'm very interested in listening what people have to tell me who are like committed to modes of technology and modes of making that I wouldn't be drawn to.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You said at one point that you are not uncritical, which I thought was interesting. So if we are in this whole different time, how do you find your critical self? I mean, I know you're listening to what you're saying, but how can you be critical in something that's so new and so unknown?
Well, I think you can first try, if you're at all drawn to it, you can first try to understand like what's going on in it. I mean, it seems to me that the element of judgment, it kind of always comes in, but it doesn't come in maybe first. And if you've been around as much art as I have, there's very little I can see where I can't ask a set of questions about it. And those questions will lead me somewhere. And usually at some point they will also enable me to understand how much or how little this work has to offer me. And then whether I want to spend time with it, whether I want to go back to it, or whether I just want to leave it and go on to something else. So, but I tend to feel that there's at least with things that you're drawn to at all, that there's a process that's required of you. And just going into just going into one gallery after another and just writing sort of things off. And I think it's also like being aware of the limits of your own kind of mechanisms. Because, I mean, I say that, but everybody goes through Chelsea and just blows in and out of certain galleries. But maybe you just blow in and out of them, you take 2 steps in, you look at it, you move on. But maybe you tell yourself, I'm not saying this is bad, I'm just saying I don't want to think about this at this particular moment, and at least you leave yourself the option of coming back. But I think this coming at things, this question like, what is it asking me? What is it asking of me? I think coming at things through a set of questions is like really important. And I find there's another critical tool that if I'm writing about something, to describe it. Just, you know, in the most literal way, whether it's a video or photograph or painting, just sort of put down in words exactly what I'm seeing. And work at it until at least I have a description that conforms to some degree to what I feel that I'm actually looking at. And it's amazing what you get out of that description. All right, one more. Yeah.
You know, I was thinking about what you said just a minute ago about how in today's world it wouldn't be possible to work in the same mode or in the same way as Smith was working. And I wonder, you know, if you couldn't say that sort of shift, or that cultural moment is already ending kind of around the time of that last interview that you were referring to. The interview that it was with Hess, was it?
Yes.
And you said when you were talking about it that it would almost not have been possible to have that interview with another critic in dialogue with Smith. And when you were talking about that, I was thinking about just the way in which criticism was changing at that point. I wonder, you know, when you said it wouldn't have been possible to make that interview with another critic, whether you were thinking about how art criticism was changing, thinking about how that generation of Michael Fried and Ross Krauss and Hal Foster, how they were beginning to insist on that critical distance between critic and artist, between critic and person in biography, and whether criticism is somehow sort of part of this.
I mean, it's a great question. I mean, Smith, to his credit, you know, he was the first artist to serve on the National Council of the NEA. And I mention that because he was very much a field person, meaning he had he was very un-Greenbergian. He had a basic respect for what artists do. And he kind of was willing to support artists as a guild, almost as a field. So he would look at a lot of things. And it wasn't in his nature, when pop art came along, for example, or Donald Judd, because Judd, in fact, wrote a review of Smith in 1964. When these things came along, and Rauschenberg and Johns, he wouldn't have dismissed them. And it would have been really interesting to see what would have happened if he had actually, you know, lived longer. And I don't know, because I think, you know, those cubi, there are things in them. There's a lot of stuff. I find a lot of Smithsonian in Smith as well. There's a way in which he was very, very responsive, like always. And even though he complained constantly about critics, he was treated so well by them. They all kind of, during the critics in his lifetime, basically all revered him. So I don't know, and Krauss, who was the next generation, wrote a book on him. So I think that he would have probably had to live like another 10 years in order to see a really substantial change. But my own sense is that he would have adapted. I don't know if that answers your question, but I just want to say something else. What I said about not being able to work that way anymore, what I meant by that is if you work that way, I don't think you can change the way people think about art anymore. You can always work that way. People can always make art that way, and they can always make art that has certain meaning for them and other people. But the point where you can be transformational in terms of art history, in terms of a culture, by working that way, I think that's gone. Thank you.